Hello and welcome to Impacto Arizona, a podcast dedicated to centering Latinx voices on the important issues of our time. I'm your host, Jonathan Higuera, and I'm here along with our co-hosts, Juan Rodriguez, who is also our executive producer, and our co-host collaborator, David Lopez. So, hi guys, how are you?
We're good.
Doing good. We are fortunate today to have as our featured guest is Elvia Diaz, an independent journalist who has been covering the ICE raids and all things immigration and border security, not only as an independent journalist, but in her previous role as the opinion page editor for the Arizona Republic. Welcome, Elvia.
I'm happy to be here.
Okay, we're happy to have you. As I looked through your bio, I loved reading it. It reminded me a little bit of my trajectory as well, where I got my start in newspapers. I was glad to see you started in radio in Northern California. And the way you worked at small town newspapers and worked your way up to the Arizona Republic, it was very impressive. And the role you had at the Arizona Republic, I'm glad you stayed in newspapers. I ducked out in the mid 2000s and went a little bit different route for a while, but I'm so happy to all the relationships and the people I've met from the newspaper world. With that said, we'd love to hear people's origin stories. Before we get started in your coverage and the issues, we like to hear about where people are from, what are some of the key points in their life that led them to their current role. Anything you'd like to tell us about yourself that would let our audience know more about you, please share.
No, thank you. And again, I'm very happy to be here. I'm glad that you mentioned my beginning in radio. It was actually Spanish public radio in Northern California. When I first arrived with my family, I really didn't have any other choice because I didn't speak any English. I was already old enough to have an accent and to begin learning English from the very beginning. So I happened to be working at a public library and met some people that were working at the radio station. So I went and checked it out and they gave me something to read and apparently I did okay. So they immediately told me that I could possibly read the news. And so that's how the whole thing began. And I said read the news because back in the day, I had no idea what reporting was while gathering information, going on and talk to people. So there were a bunch of producers and a news director who would do the whole production. So my job was to read the news, and the radio station was perfect because it targeted farm workers. And so that was my life at the beginning. So I thought this is perfect. I have the ability to communicate to the people that my family was spending most time with. So that was the beginning of the beginning. I got hooked into it. Later, I knew that I wanted to do journalism and nothing else, really. So I ended up getting a college degree and began working at a national radio programming as well.
Was that radio station in Santa Rosa, California, or was it in a different city in Northern California? Do you recall?
No, it was in Santa Rosa. It's still there, KBBF FM. It has a great story behind it. I believe it is the first Chicano radio station. And I say Chicano because it began with Chicano students out of the state university there. So it's still public radio. It's still working, it's still on the air. So every time that I go there, I listen to it and I connect with them.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And I noticed in your bio, you said you were born in Mexico. What part of Mexico were you born? What city?
Michoacan. Yeah, I was born in Michoacan, raised there, a very small town. And I say small town because it was between that little town called Tumbiscatillo, about 3,000 people or so up in the mountains of Michoacan, in an actual ranch. In a ranch where you have 2 or 3 houses with a bunch of cows, a bunch of milpa, corn, what we have. So my life was between them. And I'll tell you a secret, which is not really a secret, but I hardly talk about it. Because I grew up in that kind of environment, I and my siblings did not go to school. So we didn't have the foundation. So I learned how to read and write at home with newspaper clips that my aunts would teach me. So I ended up being at school school in Tumbiscatillo, I will say for about 6 months, maybe a year. So when I came to the United States at 16, I think, gosh, it's been such a long time. Not only didn't know the language, but I did not know the basic. I didn't have the basic educational foundation that most people would have at the beginning. But I had been always been hungry for knowledge and hungry for anything new. So I began from the beginning when I got here, from learning basic math and seriously from algebra to quickly jumping into geometry. back in
Algebra
the
isn't
day,
basic
and then
for me,
the
by
rest
the
is
way.
history.
Algebra isn't
sorry.
basic for me, by the way. I was not good at math. I was so much better at reading and writing. But I've come to love math later in life. I realized the value of it
Yeah.
and the
You
thinking
know,
involved.
it's important because numbers are numbers, and I understood the concept, and so I didn't have to understand English to understand numbers. So I think that helped me a lot.
I bet it was a confidence boost. So you were homeschooled at Michoacan, your family's version of homeschool, letting you read newspapers. I think the fact that you learned to read probably was the boost. I've been told that if you learn to read, even if you get no other instruction in whatever, social studies, math, if you can read, you can learn. You can teach yourself later. You can advance. So that was a smart thing your Thea
It's
did in
true.
sharing the newspaper clippings
It's
with you.
true. Yeah. Yeah. When I got to Northern California and someone introduced me to the public library, I immediately began reading books. And I began with reading the classics from Mariano Azuela in Mexico to when I could learn English to Steinbeck to all the classics here. So yes, reading is a key. It was a key.
Yes, that's a beautiful story. I'm sure you share that with students and others that you talk to because that will give them
I
hope,
don't,
right?
and I don't know why. I should.
Yeah, I think you should. I really do. I think students would be inspired by that. And now you find yourself in the middle of being an independent journalist out there covering this ICE situation, the raids and things that are going on. And I noticed from your Substack reports, you have actually been on the scene of a number of these things. Tell us the latest. What's the latest thing you covered? What are your thoughts on what's going on right now in Arizona when it comes to ICE and our immigrant community and I know it's a broad question, but you tell me what you're seeing out there these days.
What I've seen is something that I have not captured before, and it's what's happening across the country. That's one of the things that I wanted to continue to cover. I have covered immigration for a long time, ever since I decided that I wanted to write in English and switch from Spanish radio to newspapers. I decided that I never wanted to have the Latino beat. We can talk about that later because I knew I was going to cover that by default. I love politics and I wanted to stay in politics, period. So I have always covered immigration here in Arizona because it's one of the things that obviously I cared about. Since Proposition 200 back in the day, I don't know if you remember, which was a state proposition that denied services to undocumented immigrants, later with SB 1070. So I have been covering that anti-immigrant sentiment from Arizona that obviously spilled across the nation. But I haven't seen the aggressiveness that I'm seeing right now. I haven't seen the migra, the agents going so rogue. And so I wanted to see it for myself because we have seen the images on TV. I have been reading a lot and it's pretty traumatic. But I'm going around, I almost call myself a migra watcher because every time there's a sighting, I go there and check it out to see. And that's how I ended up at the Zips raid the other day, which is a restaurant bar. So as soon as
Right at
had
Park
already
Central,
told me
right?
that it was going to happen. So I decided to stay near one of those establishments all day and see, happened to work nearby. So I decided to go, and it turned out to be a different kind of raid that we're seeing elsewhere. But I got to see how it feels when you see a bunch of federal agents armed to the teeth, masked. You don't know what's happening at the moment. Just other places, we did not know exactly if they actually had a search warrant. We did not know how it was going to be unfolding. So it is a weird sense of being in the middle of something that could quickly get out of control.
And
You know, I have
I thought I saw that the crowd that gathered there was angry, and I don't know if they actually confronted the ICE agents. You tell us, you were there, but the crowd that gathered when they realized what was going on, were they hostile? Were they just peaceful protesters? What was going on with the crowd? Because that's how this thing can really boil
outside the
over, right?
activists, yeah. Yeah, the activists will say it's a peaceful protest, and then the broader definition, yes, it was, because that kind of protest is protected by the First Amendment. It's a constitutionally protected thing, but it doesn't mean that you have to be quiet. They were pretty noisy, and yes, they were confronting the ICE agents. To me, it was not aggressive in the sense that they were not physically touching the officers, but they were in their face. I
Yeah.
would say they were incredibly aggressive, the protesters. One of the things that I got to see is a kind of organization that is happening, and that's hopeful, because when I got there were about, I don't know, about 5, 6 people from the community gathering, and so there was hardly anyone. The officers were coming in and out of the building. But within a few minutes, and I will say a few minutes, like within 10 or 15 minutes, people began gathering by the dozens. And so suddenly you had a bunch of people screaming at the officers with signs. And then towards the end of the day or the evening, I would say it took about 90 minutes or 2 hours. There were, I didn't count them, but there were dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, already gathering and
Really?
screaming
That
and
many?
yelling and trying to obstruct the officers, yes.
And we're seeing this kind of organization really starting to, in Arizona at least, not just Arizona, it's happening in other states too, but to grow, as we noticed with this surprise detention issue, right? I understand there was a standing room only, if not more, at the surprise city council to protest.
Yeah,
putting
I covered the
ICE
council
detention
meeting.
facility there.
Yeah, not physically, but there were. I was told 120 people spoke at the council meeting, but there were more than 1,000 people outside that couldn't get in. It was an impressive crowd as well.
And then I'm seeing from the clips, it sounds like the surprise city council saying we can't do anything about it. They already bought the land. I don't know if anybody has any updates on that, on whether that can be a successful challenge or not, but it's
Probably
hard.
not. And I wrote a column. Yeah, I wrote a column about that. I wrote a column before, and then after the meeting, I was very disappointed with the mayor because he was very polite. The council members were incredibly polite. They listened to everyone through hours and hours of testimony at night. But then at the end, he only said a few words. He essentially said, "Thank you for showing up. We hear you. Your voice is impactful and powerful. Good night." So to me, that was a missed opportunity to address them, to speak to them honestly, and essentially say, we can't do anything about it, and this is why. Clearly, some of the speakers there did not know that city zoning doesn't supersede federal government. So an explanation of that sort was absolutely necessary, I think, from the mayor's perspective, because that's what we need, leadership. And to me, at the very least, say something. That's
I'm
what
grinning
they're clamoring
because
for.
I'm grinning because that seemed like a very political thing to do. Just say thank you very much without making any kind of commitment or not even trying to explain yourself in this case.
I wonder.
He had the bully pulpit, and so he had an opportunity to exercise it. I was at a Know Your Rights with some of our folks last Sunday, and I was talking to an organizer about Surprise, and I told him about what has been going on in the city of Newark, New Jersey from the very beginning, because they have Delaney Hall there, which is a federal facility. And this was the site, if you remember, where they arrested Raz Baraka, who's the mayor of Newark, and also the site where they're now charging a congresswoman with assaulting an ICE officer. But what the city of Newark was doing, and I don't know, I think it is worth exploring, is that they were not looking at zoning. They were looking at other code and licensing issues. And basically, I don't know that they relinquished that authority at that point. So I think that's one thing to think about. The other thing is what's been happening around the country is that the congressional delegations, if they're in that district and our allies are just basically making site visits, and there's been they have the absolute right, and ICE has been trying to keep them from doing that. But that's another thing that they can do, is just really the power of the sunshine to do that. But apparently that facility was bought like completely with cash, because it was so flush in cash that it was flush in cash. And it's just, it at a minimum should always be used to organize the community, and that 1,000 people were there is actually very inspiring.
Yeah, very
And you know what? One of the things that I noticed, because I stayed up all throughout the whole meeting through midnight, most of the speakers were Anglos, were white. And to me, that was very telling. So they can say that the Latinos are the ones coming out screaming, opposing ICE. People from all walks of life speaking against that. Clearly, there were some that spoke for it, but I'll say the majority, maybe 4 or 5. I don't know the number for sure, but I did not hear many of them. And they brought up a lot of issues that I have mentioned in my previous columns as well, to your point, David. There's so many things a city can do, even if they're not going to be able to block it. For instance, where are they going to get the sewer? The warehouse is empty. Right now, it's a shell. They have to retrofit it to house people there. So they need to be connected with the sewer system, I would suppose. Other issues that were brought up is, what if something happens? If there is a fire, who are they going to call? The city, obviously. City firefighters. Who, if there is a health emergency, who are they going to call? An ambulance. So it has to be the local services.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yep.
I don't
Those
think
are
the
all good
city
points.
of Surprise is going to do anything. I was reading that ICE is buying these kind of warehouses all across the country.
You mentioned, Elvia, right now about purchasing property. That
One.
just happened this week in San Antonio, Texas.
You one?
I'm working on the congressional campaign there,
okay.
communications
Right.
director for a candidate. And the news dropped a week ago. And this is being done quick, and I'm sure cash had a lot to do with it. There's a warehouse in southeast San Antonio. Last week it was leaked that the ICE was looking at it, and from our understanding, the deal's over. It's already been purchased within a week.
And they can. They're legally
Yeah.
doing it. They have billions of
But what I
dollars
appreciate
at
about-
their disposal. So clearly they can spend whatever
Yeah.
money they can, and they're using third-party people the way we, the journalists, can find out fast enough that they are in the process of purchasing these kinds of real estate.
It sounds like it's probably.
Well, they're real estate holding companies too. There's different levers of accountability. And I just got something, obviously social media is dangerous and bad, but every now and then something pops up just about the holding company that's involved and all the shareholders who are involved in that facility and Surprise. And so that becomes, I think, a different point of pressure. One of the things I've studied is that one of the things that you saw in Arizona during SB 1070 is you saw communities like Mesa just completely flip, and those folks got off the fence. And even now, the mayor of Mesa is like pretty outspoken against ICE. And a lot of that had to do with the LDS church, but a lot of it had to do with just different points of pressure. And I think the reason that you have so many allies show up is they're like, hey, wait a second, these are our neighbors and my kids go to school with them. And I think that's what you're seeing. You're just seeing, wait, I didn't know that's what you meant. I didn't know you meant so-and-so. So I wouldn't necessarily treat like past as prologue in terms of those districts. 1,000 people is a lot of people for that district. And I think that's a good starting point.
And it was a split screen that night, so that's why I think it was so impressive, because of the same evening, Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, was spending the night here about 5 miles from my house. So there was another protest going on there at the same time. So they were directing people to both locations. So I thought that was impressive.
Let me ask you a journalistic question, because I think that I just did a call with 2 community lawyers, and one was from LA and the other was from Chicago. And I was really excited to have them, because I wanted them to be on this call to talk to the future law students about what movement lawyering looks like. And then Minneapolis happened, right? And so in Minneapolis, they just announced that they're taking more than hundreds of troops out of Minneapolis. They fled Chicago too. And even though those were really violent skirmishes and people died, to a certain extent, the community did a really good job in terms of pushing back. And so I think the iPhone's been a really good friend for the kidnappings and for the due process abuses. But then you have these detention facilities that are out in the middle of nowhere, and there's abuses going on there. It's just, I'm just wondering about, as a journalist, what are the secrets to get that story? Because I suspect, and I really hope that I'm wrong, but I suspect that I'm right, that as bad as things look in the street, what's going on in the detention facilities is much worse. And I've done cases involving those private companies, so I know what they do. And how, as a journalist, do you bring that to the public's attention? Because they're banking on out of sight, out of mind. It's just, how do you tell that story? That's just such a hard story to tell.
It is a hard story to tell because you have the Eloy Correctional Facility over there, or whatever they call it, where they're housing immigrants. And there, we've heard some horror stories coming out of there, but there's that Florence project where those lawyers are working on that and monitoring things a little bit more closely. So at least we're hearing about some of those things, but I don't think that's going to
the
be
lawyers
the
have
case
often
going
been
forward with all these other warehouses.
The lawyers are the source of information, but how do and then they hide behind the private status, and can you get FOIA requests? Do you have to answer FOIA requests? So I'm just curious, as a journalistic matter, how you do good reporting in that area.
It's very difficult. You're right. Thankfully, with the phone, I will say is one of the greatest tools right now the residents have, and that we journalists have as well. As soon as you see something, you hit record and do not stop recording, right? That's the only way that we're able to find the truth on the streets. But in terms of going into prisons and jails is one of the most difficult things to do as reporters, because as you have seen, not even congressional representatives are able to just drop by and visit. I have gone a few times to Florence with lawyers, mainly with lawyers, immigration lawyers, and as a journalist, they never ever let me go in, and I have tried many times. So it's nearly impossible to see with my own eyes what was going on. I have gone inside with lawyers, not telling them that I am a reporter, but obviously I am very careful not to use that information. I only use it to formulate and see with my own eyes what is happening. So I think we would, one, aggressively keep FOIA every single thing that we can, but that's going to take forever. That's going to take years. So we have to rely on people who are able to see it, to record, or to get documents and to give it to us. We're relying on lawyers. We're relying on family members that are able to see. Hopefully they can record conversations. Hopefully they can record when they go inside. But it's very difficult. Immigration lawyers tell me that this administration is very difficult to navigate because, one, they can cancel anytime. Even if they have court hearings, they're not allowing them to go. These are the lawyers that represent them. And I had the case of a lawyer who told me that showed up at a hearing in Florence and had to do it, the whole hearing from her car, just outside the chamber, because they would not allow the person to go inside the facility just because the guard said, no, you can't. So if they're not able to do it, they're not going to let journalists go.
Yeah.
That's why I think it has to be stopped before they build all these warehouses. But I see it as a very difficult task ahead.
Yeah, when I was on the call the other day, both of the lawyers said that one of the most effective things that has been done are the sanctuary city laws. And so that's why that city council meeting was so important, because for the mayor to sit on the fence, that's not the time to sit on the fence.
But see, that's another political hot button, because if you declare your city to be sanctuary, you're going to be targeted by Trump and you're going to be losing money. And that's why I think we see in the city of Phoenix, who's run by Democrats and liberal folks, are very cagey about saying we are even considering becoming a sanctuary city. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it, even though they're Democrats, they're liberals, because they do not want to lose federal funding right now.
But I guess the question is always, why is Minneapolis doing it or Chicago doing it? Or what are the political conditions on the ground and how do you get there? Because there are cities that have moved in this space and they're willing to face every single repercussion that they have. City of Denver, city of Portland, city of Seattle, like you can go on. And the question is like, why is Phoenix in one box and those other cities in another box?
Leaders, the
Yeah.
political will of local elected officials, from the governor here in Arizona, who I'm not afraid to say she's a coward when it comes to immigration, when it comes to defending immigrants. And then you have a mayor who, here in the city of Phoenix, who is very smart, very friendly to our community, but very cautious as well. So I think that conditions there on those states, you have a governor who, and a mayor who is essentially saying in front of national TV, F ICE, get the F out of my town, not afraid, just going at it. We don't have that. We don't have that here in Arizona.
But let me ask you a question, because I'm going to talk to my students about this tomorrow, about like the relationship between immigration and Latinidad, right? And one of the things that happened during SB 1070 is when they start rolling up on Latinos who have papers, that changed the political calculus also. And now that you have just like widespread, like what happened in Arizona is now happening all over the country with the racial profiling. And what that means is that a lot of the people in, I will say, our community who sit on the fence and don't say anything, stick their head down, that got them involved. And I'm just wondering if now that like their targets and their kids will be targets might politicize them. But then at the other end, what do you make of the fact that like the two police officers that shot that guy in Minneapolis were presumably Latino? They have Latino names.
Border Patrol agents.
Okay. What do we make of that as a community, just in terms of organizing our own community?
Well, it tells us that we are not monolithic. It tells us that all the people that voted for Trump are real, that there is a split, that even among our community, among Latinos and Latino immigrants, there are a lot of Trump supporters. And we cannot close our eyes to that. It's reality. I think a lot of them are changing their minds right now. But I encounter a lot of them that still support him, that still support the president, and say, yeah, go after those. So the fact that those ICE agents that killed Pretty, I believe they're both from Texas. So you have a lot of folks, a lot of Latinos that are working as ICE agents that want to do it. In Yuma, Arizona, for instance, I go there very often because I have a friend who lives there. This Trump territory there. A lot of Latinos are working for ICE. A lot of Latinos are still in love with Donald Trump. So we can't close our eyes to that.
But I guess I'm just wondering, like in South Texas, and Juan knows South Texas better than I do, but you also, if you don't have any other jobs, like if you get benefits for those jobs, you don't have, I don't think ASU has a branch everywhere. I don't think they have a branch in Yuma. I don't know if there's a public hospital. Like if you don't have other jobs, they're going to take those jobs. And then they're like,
but you don't have to be, you need to beep this, Jonathan, beep. You don't have to be a terrible person. I mean, even if you want to take that job.
But I'm just saying
you
that.
You have to
like,
be an asshole, essentially. Like, we can understand that there are no other jobs, that you have to work for La Migra, like in places in Yuma, that there are very few people, and you have great benefits. And now, with the Trump administration, you're going to get a huge bonus. But again, don't be an asshole.
No,
the reason
I keep this is I want the students to ask those questions, not just about immigration, but everything they do and what systems they might be complicit in. That's why I asked that question.
I was in the Naval Reserve when I lived in Tucson, and I would go on my weekends and work, and we had a fair number of Latinos who were part of Border Patrol. I wouldn't say the overwhelming amount. It was probably still more Anglos. We had them, and so I got to know them, and a lot of them were good guys, but they were raising families, probably didn't have a college degree, but you could raise a family on your salary, your Border Patrol salary. You could make sure they all had benefits. And they struck me as fairly reasonable people, really. I did have some conversations with some guys that did seem out of line in terms of their view of the Mexican immigrant, particularly, or other immigrants. One in particular, I remember he'd asked me, what is that language they're speaking? Because they were speaking Zapotec. He was there capturing some of the folks from Oaxaca. But yeah, to your point, Elvia, I think you can do that job and do it with humanity. I don't know if they're under the same edict as the military.
They're not even the best of the worst.
Legal order. Or maybe they aren't, but
They're not even the best of the worst.
That leads me to
we
another
know,
question
yeah,
for you, Elvia.
Yeah. Politically speaking, we know that ICE has become President Trump's private
was like
army.
6, 7
That all the people that they are hiring right now, the new ones, are not the best of the best. Most
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah, they're not doing even thorough background checks. What's that one?
The worst of the worst, yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
And without the training is also very short and not adequate as well. But Elvia, that leads me to another question for you. Since you have covered border security for many years, we've had a couple of guests, including one guest here who says their reality of what they saw on the border was not at all what the national reports would say, which we're being overrun in our borders, just it's chaos. The drugs, the human smuggling is completely out of control. I've had two guests tell me that it wasn't at all their experience when they were down there. Yes, some of that did go on, but not to the chaotic point that it's been politicized. You've covered border security, and that's got to be a tough line for politicians, by the way, especially in Arizona. We noticed how Mr. Gallegos has shifted a little bit towards more rightward on that issue in particular, because he knows our electorate here. But how do you feel about the way border life, border security is characterized, not only here in Arizona, but just in general reporting that you see?
We know that media does exaggerate things. And I have worked in newspapers, television, in this environment for 30 years. And yes, you are targeting, your objective is to get maximum audience. Clickbaits are real. We absolutely did that. And I say we because I count myself on it.
What you were saying, I spend a lot of time, my family is from all the way from Austin, Texas, all the way to Gila, that whole area. And on the border at Eagle Pass, where I have family, during the supposedly hordes of people coming over, there was nothing going on. You had this buildup, but there was nothing. I would take
Right.
people on tours to the border to show them at Eagle Pass, there's nobody coming over. There's just a bunch of whooping cranes and other birds flying around. And I saw the river that had a lot of wire placed in it. And I saw a lot of land being terraformed to alter the course of the river, at the same time upsetting crops, upsetting migration patterns. And a lot of it was done without permits. It was just done. But there was nobody coming over. The only way people were coming over was across the two bridges there in Eagle Pass. That was it.
So I think it depends on what part of the border you're talking about. So there are certain sections that were absolutely chaotic. And it is true that during the Biden administration, there were sections of the border where you had thousands of people waiting to ask for asylum, and that was chaotic. We can't say
Yes.
that it wasn't. And so in certain sections in Nogales, for instance, I was there a few times,
Yeah.
when in Texas, we saw it. Of course, that was a terrible thing to happen, and it was out of control.
Right.
Now, when you go to the border, again, it depends. So to say that it's not happening is not true either, right? Not as chaotic as it was during the asylum seekers under the Biden administration, but illegal immigration is still happening. Not at the same rate, but has always happened. Drugs are crossing the border, mainly through the port of entries. We know that because the U.S. consumers are dying because of it. I mean, the demand is here. So we know there are crimes committed because of that as well. So all that is happening. All that is real. We just don't see it to the extent and as dramatic as we see it on TV.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects of that are frustrating as a news consumer. I went down because I teach it. I went down to the Texas border. I took John and I went down to Nevada's. I've been on I've been on the wall in many different places on both sides, right? Because I needed to see it. But I think that what the news, and obviously the Fox network is trying to create a narrative for political purposes. And they did that, and they recycle the same images. But where I think the media failed, not the independent reporters, like when you said independent, I'm like, yes. But where I think the media failed, including the Spanish language media, is that they failed to provide any context about Title 42, about COVID. The crossings were way down during the last year under Biden. Not that it didn't create suffering, but it was just the Mexican government agreed to have the National Guard push people down. So now all the suffering's in Tapachula and all the suffering's in Mexico City, but the crossings were down because he did that. And so there was no context. There was no context that Title 42 was invoked and people were not allowed to come in and ask for asylum. So what happened that they were just lined up on the border. 50 were killed in Juarez, right? Just with that horrible disaster in Juarez, and people were just waiting. And I'm not saying that maybe things could have been done differently or weren't done differently. Then the other aspect of this is that so many of these people came from 3 or 4 countries, but let me just focus on Venezuela. And nobody talked about what's happening in Venezuela and why. Nobody talked about the sanctions of Venezuela. Nobody talked about the fact that the Venezuelan diaspora had a larger percentage-wise in Colombia, and they had a lot of people in Spain. They were all over the place. No one could even talk about the root causes. Like I felt like the media failed us during the last 2 years of the Biden administration. I feel like the Biden administration couldn't even make a story for itself. And I think that the Spanish language media, and this is what I was hoping Juan would ask, because I've learned this from Juan, like where the Spanish language media that could have been providing texture and dimension and human voices is just me tooing everything that's happening at the same thing and running the same loops.
Unfortunately, the media landscape has changed dramatically the past few years. It's not the media that we see right now is not the same one that I worked for 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. It's shrinking. Investment in local reporting and this kind of reporting has been shrinking dramatically. And so I blame the landscape. I blame us reporters because we're always looking for that clip, that 30-second most dramatic image, and we're going to run with that. We always run with that, and we're going to amplify it 1,000,000 times to get the people's attention. So that's reality. But also I blame the consumer because for the past few years, as a columnist and as the editorial page editor of the Arizona Republic, I tried to do that, really did, with my columnists, with guest columns, with people within to go deeper, to do some reporting and explain people, to talk about Title 42 that you were talking about, and guess what? No one would read it. The page view, the traffic would drop. And so there's always a cycle. If no one is reading what we are writing, if no one is watching the video that we are producing, and if we're giving all that information and people are not consuming that, then what do we do? So we turn around and say, well, that didn't work.
Well, we also
So it's a
have to make
catch-22.
sure
So I blame the public as well.
we also have to make sure we're giving the public to see what's going on sometimes. For example, all this expenditure on the border wall, obviously they won the PR war that said the border is being overrun. We need this very expensive wall. I was in San Diego this weekend. I was on Coronado Island, not bragging or anything, but this one merchant told me
Maybe the problem is the bourgeois press. I'm just kidding.
I only go once every few years, but a merchant told me when he found out I was from Arizona, he goes, "Oh, we lost a lot of business this past summer." And I said, "Oh, really?" He goes, "Yeah, zonies are really a big part of my consumer base here, especially in the summer. And what's been going on is sewage has been creeping up from Tijuana in Mexico and forcing them to shut the beaches in San Diego, particularly in that Imperial Beach area where the Coronado Island kind of faces that one." And in my mind, so it is a big story in San Diego, but I'm thinking this almost has national implications. Why we've spent this amount of money on border wall, and I still call them INS, but now they're called ACE, the ice buildup. We could have been helping Mexico a little get their wastewater treatment plants back online. Apparently they have them, but they're broke and no one's fixing them. And so it has this backlash into the U.S., and it's not being addressed. To me, that's like a national issue. That adds context. Okay, where are all our taxpayer monies going to build this wall in parts of, so we shut off the San Rafael Valley there, just in Sonoita, Patagonia, which is going to have a devastating impact on wildlife, and not even that many border crossers there, very few. We don't have these robust conversations that really show all the different realms of this issue. And we just simplify it to a border being overrun and a billions and billions of dollars to build a border wall. Whereas there are elements that we could be doing with our money as U.S. taxpayers that would not only help Mexico, but would help us on the U.S. side as well. I think we're going to have to wind this down here. So if I could ask for any closing comments from all of you.
I think David has something to say.
Can I have a closing
Okay.
question? I will no longer comment. And it's a 2-word question. Don Lemon? What
Nick
do we
Valencia.
need to, what do we out there as people who care about what's going on in this country need to know about that situation?
But to Jonathan's comment as well, it worries me tremendously, again, that there are fewer reporters and serious journalists doing the work that we need to do to really find out what's going on. And then the ones that are left, people like me that are still working, even all of us could be working in PR or other jobs and making a lot more money, and yet here we are being targeted. Because that's why I wrote a column about what the Lemon arrest meant. It's a direct attack on the First Amendment in journalists. It's an attack to tell people, journalists specifically, journalists like me, that if you do something that we don't like, we're going to target you. And it's scary because even when you have an entire corporation behind you, like I did before, they can still target you. They can still make your life miserable. But then if you are an independent journalist like me, you have nothing. You don't have money. You don't have a backing. So it sends this message that do something that we don't like at your own peril. And that's not a democratic country. That's not where we want to be. So that's what's happening. We have there were 2 judges who did not find enough evidence to sign an arrest warrant for those journalists so they went shopping until they found one. So it's very dangerous, I will say. And unfortunately, I think it's going to scare a lot more people into keeping this job and to being journalists. And instead of finding other jobs and said, oh, I don't have money to pay lawyers and keep doing this job and honestly, it's also a reflection. Do people really care about what I do? It's the kind of questions that we ask ourselves of journalists, especially the ones that I have done it for 30 years or more than 30 years. And like, what am I doing to myself? If people are not going to take it seriously, if the public don't see it, why am I doing this?
So with that, I would say if you liked this edition, please subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you content like this. Until next time, have a wonderful day.